I'm joined today by Sarah Haider, who's a writer, public speaker, activist, and founder of Ex-Muslims of North America, a community building organization for those who have left Islam. Sarah, you were born in Pakistan, you were raised in Texas. Talk to us a little bit about how religious your family was growing up.
Well, I was pretty lucky in the sense that my parents weren't extremely religious. What I would call is I would say that they're liberal, not liberal in the American sense, but liberal compared to many Muslim families in the sense that I was allowed to go away to college. I really did have to lobby hard to do that, but I was allowed to move away from home to do that. So I would say relatively liberal. And that's part of the reason that I'm able to do this, that I'm able to be a public speaker, that I'm able to talk about my lack of religiosity because I don't actually have to fear my family.
And as you were growing up, were there other Muslim families that you would sort of see and realize that there was a difference between the religiosity of your family and theirs?
Absolutely. I mean, even within my own family, it's not, I didn't have to look out into the community to see how more religious families behaved and the restrictions that were imposed, especially on the women in more religious families. I just had to look to see my cousins. But of course, we were part of the broader Muslim community in Houston. So I did see what some of the more hardcore Muslims, how they lived and how they interacted.
How did the transition out of Islam start to happen? I mean, I know you started reading the Quran with a more critical eye, and that eventually led to you leaving religion. But what was it that really catalyzed you even wanting to read the Quran more critically?
Well, I mean, a huge part of it was just being in America and knowing that there were people that thought differently than I did. I mean, that in itself makes you be a little bit curious about, why other people are rejecting your belief, if it is so obvious and so clearly the truth. But I did come into contact with quite a few atheists, which pushed me into, I think, more directly out of religion because I think they were a little bit more direct in confronting me about my faith and what I believed, and challenging me truly to defend it.
Was there any particular issue or teaching or sacred text from Islam that had the most impact on you in terms of pushing you away, be it teaching about women or teaching about education or whatever the case may be? Was there a particular issue that really struck you?
Well, I mean, I think this is something that a lot of ex-Muslim women can relate to, which is specifically the way that the Islamic religion and the tradition treats women.
Hmm.
There's that infamous verse in the Quran which basically states that it's okay to discipline a wife, for a husband to discipline a wife by beating her. And this is something that was really difficult for me to square with my belief before, which was that Islam is a religion that is equal for men and women, and then women are treated very well in Islam. That's what I thought. So once I started reading into the Quran and really looking into it, and especially coming across those verses in particular, it was really hard for me to hold on to it any longer, to justify my faith in it.
I'd be curious to hear from you what the reaction was from different communities to you leaving Islam. And among those, I would love to hear what the reaction was first from the family you mentioned, the parts of your family that are more devout, more religious. And then you said you were part of the broader Muslim community in Houston, which is a significant community. What was the reaction there?
Well, to be honest, I'm not really very active in those communities any longer. So
Hmm.
I don't actually have a direct view to see how they actually would behave towards me and how they would feel about me, because what my lack of faith has done has really pushed me away from them, and really pushed me away from people that I consider my friends, people I consider my close associates. So I would imagine that they're not too happy about it, but there is that distance there that is preventing me from really having any conversations with anybody.
In some of the speeches of yours that I've watched, you take what I consider to be a pretty nuanced approach to the problems that exist within some Muslim communities today, in the sense that you, of course, point out that it is completely unfair and out of place and completely unproductive to criticize Muslims as people broadly for the actions taken by a very small portion of Muslims. At the same time, though, you've pointed out the broader and more prevalent problems that exist, including some of the ones I've looked at that we can see sort of illuminated by the 2013 Pew Research study on beliefs held by Muslims around the world, etc. Have you been characterized as anti-Muslim by some?
Oh, absolutely. And that's the knee-jerk reaction I think that people have. And what I found that no matter how nuanced I am, no matter how verbally I speak about anti-Muslim bigotry and about difficulties and persecutions that are faced by the Muslim community in America and in the West in general, it hasn't really helped that image very much. And it's kind of disheartening because it's difficult to see any way that you can get away with criticizing Islam, the belief system as a whole, without being painted as a bigot, without
Hmm.
being painted as, anti-Muslim in some way. So I've begun to understand the struggle that some other people that have been speaking out against Islam face, which is that it's really difficult to find any way of doing it without and escape being called these things.
Yeah, I mean, on the one hand, we've recently, with the different stories that have been in the news, in the same discussion, I will point out that it is completely unfair, for example, to call on any random Muslim person to denounce Muslim terrorism because they are just random people with no connection to those events. And I'll be criticized for saying that. And at the same time, Sarah, I will say, hey, we also need to remember that, as I mentioned, according to that 2013 Pew Forum study, over a billion of the then 1.62 billion Muslims on this planet believe that, for example, Sharia law should be the law of a country, and that is also an extremist belief that we should be challenging. And then the left will criticize me, saying I'm not being culturally sensitive and I'm being anti-Muslim and I'm being unfairly critical. And it seems like on this issue, if you speak with nuance, you're opening yourself up to criticism from both and all sides. And I'm wondering if you've experienced the same thing.
Well, absolutely, and that's the funny thing about it, isn't it? Is that if you do speak with nuance, if you do try to listen to the difficulties facing both sides and what their needs are and why they are addressing what they are, you find yourself attacked by both. It's not that you win more hearts and minds, which makes it really difficult to continue on in this nuanced way. And I can see why in the broader political atmosphere you see people polarized. I mean, extremely polarized when it comes to the discussion around Islam as a religion and an ideology. It's really difficult to find anyone walking that middle path because it seems that no one is really interested in hearing somebody that is walking that middle path and that is speaking about this in a nuanced way. And I think that especially what you were saying with remembering that these are people and any individual isn't directly responsible, of course, for the actions of somebody, of extremists, of people like ISIS, but at the same time, keeping into account that these practices that are practiced on a very broad scale are very harmful to a lot of people, especially women and especially sexual minorities.
And along those lines, you co-authored a very interesting article after Reza Aslan became quite well known in many circles as a sort of defender of the faith. You wrote a very specific and precise critique of some of the things he was saying, and you felt, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but sort of to open up this discussion, you felt that he was being misleading about Islam and women's rights, Islam and the desire for Sharia law, and a number of other issues. Can you talk to us a little bit about how he first got on your radar and why you decided to write this article about him?
Well, there was this video, this CNN appearance that Reza did, where he gets on with these two hosts, and I think he was discussing initially Bill Maher and the new atheists in general, but then he got onto the subject of Islam as a whole,
Right.
and he started, expanding upon it. And this video was being shared by everyone that I knew on Facebook, on social media overall. That was being emailed to me that look at this wonderful nuanced video, and I watched it and I listened to it and I thought. So much of this is not true, and so much of this is very misleading. But it's the kind of thing that people want to hear. I mean, there's a sense of we should be fair to Muslims because here you have, ISIS that is depicting this view of Islam as a very extremist religion. So there's a tendency for many to want someone to say that no, it is actually peaceful and look at all these wonderful things that happen in the name of Islam. I think to bring some balance into it. But we do have to remember that we have to have this conversation has to be honest, and it cannot be just about politics or any sense of PR, which is I think what's going on in many different ways. We have to talk about being honest about what's going on in Islam, what's going on in Muslim communities, and remember to be compassionate towards the people within them.
The reaction. I had a similar reaction to your reaction when those videos started going viral, and I was truly disappointed, Sarah, to see those my fellow progressives, those presumably on the left, criticizing me as a sort of Zionist Islamophobe by virtue of me happening to have been born into a Jewish family based on what I felt was a pretty nuanced and sober critique of some of the areas where I felt Reza was being misleading. And that, I expect this from the hard right that themselves are often anti-woman, anti against minorities of other kinds, etc. But it's particularly hurtful to me and also discouraging when I see it from those on the left. And I don't know if you have that same sense.
Absolutely, and you're right. The things that I brought up about Reza's article, and the things that I talk about in general, these are basic liberal principles. These are about basic human rights, women's rights, respect for autonomy, and a certain amount of civil liberties and freedom to believe what you want. I mean, should be things that all liberals should align with us. With. And one thing that I have found, I've spoken to activists from across the world. I've talked to a lot of people who were, in the Middle East or were in parts of South Asia, and they're liberals and they're fighting for women's rights and they're fighting for liberal values, and they come to America and or any part of the West, and they think that they will find a lot of allies in the American left and in the Western left overall, but then they're disheartened to find that that's not what's happening, and in fact that they're being painted as bigots, as sellouts, as tools for the right wing, and it's very discouraging. I mean, it's very discouraging to be abandoned by people that should be ours. These are our values. These are our principles, and it's discouraging to be abandoned.
Could not say it better myself. I'll remind you, we've been speaking with Sarah Haider, writer, public speaker, activist, and of course, founder of Ex-Muslims of North America. Sarah, it's been so great having you on. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me, David.